We want you to know that autism is not an intellectual disability. As a matter of fact, there are many autistic people who have above average IQs. There's lots of autistic people who have average IQs. There are some people who have an intellectual disability, but it's not related to autism. Autism is not a developmental disability. Autistic people develop at our own pace that is appropriate for an autistic brain. Autism is not a lack of empathy or compassion. We have lots of empathy, often overwhelming us because of our big emotions. Autism is not a lack of theory of mind because we are able to take perspective of others when they're also able to take our perspectives. It's a two-way street on that. Autism is not a mutation, a defect, or a mistake. We are as we are, and we have families of autistic people. We come from long lines of autistic people, and we'll be happy to talk about that today. What autism is. So, in the 2000s, there were a lot of studies of autistic brains. There were a lot of brain scans of fMRIs, MRIs, CAT scans, PET scans, high definition fiber tracking, and microscopes. And when the scientists look at our brains under microscopes, this is what they found. This is an allistic neuron, a neuron that is not autistic. As you can see, it has fewer dendrites, these long strings that connect to other neurons than our neurons. We have more dendrites. Our dendrites are nice and thick, and all these little dots on here are connections to other neurons. These connections are called synapses. And this incredible connection, this incredible hyperconnection is the thing that makes us who we are. Recent studies have shown that autism is up to 94% hereditary. So that means that these sort of neurons are just the ways of families, the ways of our people. And when we look at another sort of scan, this is a slide that shows high definition fiber tracking scans of autistic brains and neurotypical brains. High definition fiber tracking means it's measuring the amount of oxygen used at any given moment in a brain. The neurotypical brain, as you can see, has a really robust neurotypical social pathway, which is what neurotypicals usually use. Our brains, on the other hand, have connections all throughout. And a big reason for this is the synaptic pruning. You see, neurotypical brains, allistic brains, go through a process called synaptic pruning and autophage, where they have a chemical that their brain emits that dissolves unused connections, unused synapses. And the theory behind this is that it makes the brain more efficient to not have these extra connections. It's very direct for any given task. Our brains do not dissolve. Our brains do not weed out extra connections. So therefore, we have connections all over the place. This is essentially, let's say you have a tree and you have the main branches that branch off into all the little branches, but you decide you don't want all the little branches, so you chop all the tiny branches off and you only have the big main branches. This is what happens to neurotypical brains, where all brains look very similar because they all just have the big branches. This is why we call neurotypical brains typical, because when scanned, when looked at, when evaluated, when explored, the brains all do very, very similar things because all the extra stuff has been weeded out. This is also a reason why neurotypical brains cannot be gifted. Neurotypical brains cannot have intellectual disabilities because the neurotypical brain is typical. You cannot be a gifted neurotypical. You can be a gifted allistic. You can be a gifted autistic. And this is a big confusion that resides among neurotypical people because uh, autistic brains are often gifted. There's an article that was published about 2 years ago at this point that says that autism is a disorder of high intelligence. And this is an interesting thing because of the hyperconnected brain. And another thing is that our brains are what they call idiosyncratic, meaning that no two autistic brains are wired the same. It's sort of like lightning strikes. A brain might be connected here, or here, or here, or here, or all of the above. Some areas might be underconnected, some areas might be overconnected. And this is why no two autistic people have the same strengths and weakness profile, because again, some autistic people might be very strong and very connected here, but not so much here. That's why if you met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. We are not a monolith. Although, one thing that is in common for us, because the neurotypical brain weeds out so many connections, neurotypical people have a measured sensory bottleneck that tunes out up to 98% of all sensory input. We do not have that. This is why sensory input for us is very, very intense all the time. We do not have the ability to tune things out. We do not have the ability to what they call habituate, meaning that if a neurotypical person is exposed to something that is irritating for long enough, eventually their brains will get used to it. Because of the way our brains are wired, we don't get used to it, and it's always really, really hurtful for us. And this is why exposure therapy is often traumatizing to autistic people because we can't escape it. Also, in these scans, they've found that our brains process up to 42% more information while at rest than neurotypical brains because of all the extra connections, because of all the extra sensory input, because of everything churning around in here. Here we see the amygdala right here in the middle of the brain. And the amygdala is the fight or flight center. We have hyper-connected, hyper-dense amygdalae, which results in great big emotions. And these great big emotions often invoke a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response in response to these big emotions. Neurotypical people don't do that, and it's much easier for us to become traumatized than neurotypical people. This is a big thing that people must keep in mind when working with autistic children in a school setting who become overloaded. They will have a fight or flight or fawn or freeze response. When dealing with autistic adults, if you're doing therapy with autistic adults, there's often going to be a lot of PTSD or complex PTSD from a lifetime of overstimulation and pain. And this is where autistic therapy should really be focused. Autism, again, some areas vastly more connected, some areas less so. These hyperconnections correspond with changes in the body, changes in perception, and changes in communication. And this is a link to the idiosyncratic brain. Autism is genetic. They have found that the hereditary rate of autism is up to 94%. Autistic adults have autistic kids. Autistic kids grow up to be autistic adults. You can find autism all throughout the family. My son is autistic. I am autistic. A lot of people on my mom's side of the family are autistic. This is just the way that we go. And this is a big thing when doing autism evaluations, because if you have autistic parents of autistic children and you say, is your child doing anything strange? They say, no, at 3, they were starting to read books on their own. They spend all the time by themselves and they hate socks. This is the way of our people. This is just the way autistic families go. This is the way autistic families are raised. And autistic families can be found all around the world in every single culture on every continent, because I guarantee you that there are autistic people in Antarctica at this very moment. What we need to make people aware of is that autism is a dynamic disability, not a disorder. So when I say that, a lot of people confuse the word disability and a disorder. A disorder is what we would say essentially a health disorder where something needs to be fixed. Autism does not need to be fixed. It is not a disorder. It is working as designed. It is, however, a disability from the social model of disability. You see, the medical model of disability says that it's a problem inside us. Let's say that there's an issue with functioning and you need surgery to correct a heart valve, or you have an inflamed appendix and you need surgery because there is something that needs to be changed. We operate from a social model of disability that says that there's nothing inherently wrong with us if we were living in a society that embraced us. If we lived in an autistic culture where everyone was autistic and everyone had sensitivities with sounds and everyone disliked the feeling of socks, we would operate a lot differently. We would get up later in the day, we would have shorter work days, we would all find careers geared towards our interests. We wouldn't have cubicles we would live in a much different environment, and that wouldn't be nearly as damaging to us as the one that currently is. So our dynamic disability is based on fluctuations in environment, cognitive processing capacity, interoception, exteroception, neurofatigue, anxiety, communication differences, burnout, and sensory overwhelm. This means that on any given day, we might be dealing with an overload in our senses. We might be dealing with loud noises or itchy clothes or coworkers that keep bothering us because they want to schedule a party of some kind. We might be dealing with internal signals like a stomach ache or anxiety. We might be dealing with depression. We just might have literally too much on our minds to focus on what we're doing, and it distracts us to the point where we become non-functional. We need relief from this burnout. Autistic burnout is a major factor that impairs the health of autistic people. There are a lot of health conditions that are exacerbated by stress, and again, our brains cause a lot more intense stress than neurotypical brains do. Our bodies, because of the genetic link that changes the way our brains work, often change the way our bodies process stress, and that can cause health issues, but we'll get into that later on. As I was saying, autism, because of the genetic thing that changes our brains, it also changes our bodies. It changes the way our bodies react to our environment. It makes our bodies hypersensitive to our environment. We're often we often have higher incident rates of asthma, allergies, and chemical sensitivities because of our body sensitivities. Our incredible immune system is often fighting outside forces. And there was a study recently published that says we might be more able to fight cancer because of this sort of body intensity. At the same time, this intense body response also results in a lot of instances of fibromyalgia, lupus, autoimmune disorders, POTS, PANDAS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, all 13 types, mast cell activation syndrome, and PCOS, because our bodies just react to stress and environmental things much more intensely than our neurotypical counterparts. When we get incredibly stressed out, our bodies start to destroy themselves because when people become anxious and when people become stressed for a long period of time, the body produces a lot of cortisol. Cortisol in short bursts is helpful, but cortisol every day for weeks, for months, for years on end can slowly destroy us. And a lot of that can be linked to this. We are often more likely to have eating disorders because of a combination of interoception difficulties, scheduling difficulties, food sensitivities, and a lot of other issues that people who work with eating disorders might not recognize as autistic traits. So, other comorbidities include apraxia, where we're not able to speak. A lot of people, again, due to the way that the brain is connected, might be fantastic speakers and become what we call hyperlexic. Other people might not be able to verbally speak, but they do think, where AAC devices might be helpful in order to help autistic people communicate more effectively. People might have dysgraphia, where they are unable to control their body in the way that they would like to control it. And it comes across as messy handwriting or inability to function as other people do, a lot of random attacks of gravity. A lot of autistic people have difficulties with proprioception, and that results in a vertigo. A lot of autistic people have dyscalculia, which is linked to all these, the way that you process time and space with, and that links to numbers. Dyslexia, our brains move faster than our eyeballs, and this results in a lot of time that your brain will skip over entire words, and your brain tries to fill in the gaps, but it doesn't do it as effectively, and it looks a lot like dysgraphia proper, but there's a lot of different mechanisms behind it. And this is why further evaluation is needed in every one of these occasions, because what is a root cause may be different than what is being seen on the surface.